Sometimes, what seems ordinary hides something truly sinister. A house across the street where the curtains are always closed. A forgotten forest path from which no one returns quite the same. An old vinyl record, played once and forever changing someone's life. These stories aren't just about fear, they're about the unexplainable. They don't scream, they whisper. They don't stand out, they watch from the shadows. Listen closely, look carefully, because what you think is just coincidence might have been watching you all along. Tonight, you'll hear 3 disturbing, true horror stories. The kind that won't let you sleep peacefully ever again. Story 1. The Neighbor Across the Street. We moved into a new neighborhood when I was about 10 years old. It was a typical suburban enclave. Neat rows of houses, identical mailboxes, and perfectly manicured lawns that seemed to never need tending. Everything here exuded calm and predictability. A picture of quiet American life. Our house was on a corner, and directly across the street from us stood an identical cookie-cutter house, but with one striking difference. Its windows were always, without exception, tightly curtained. Day and night, summer and winter, not a single ray of light penetrated the thick fabric. It seemed strange, even a little ominous, a stark contrast to the open, welcoming facades of the other homes. But in the hustle of moving, we didn't pay much attention to it. It was just the house with the closed curtains. An elderly man, Mr. Henderson, lived in that house. He was a widower, and as we quickly learned from neighborhood gossip, an extremely reclusive person. We rarely saw him outside. Sometimes he would emerge to collect his mail or sit briefly on the old wooden bench on his porch, but always at the same time, very early in the morning, before most residents were awake and starting their day. He never greeted anyone, never responded to hellos. He simply stared straight ahead, his gaze fixed on some distant, unseen point, as if noticing no one, as if he were part of the landscape rather than a living person. His movements were slow, almost mechanical, and his face always remained inscrutable, a mask of indifference. My room was on the 2nd floor, and from its window I had a direct view of Mr. Henderson's house. I often found myself staring at his perpetually curtained windows. It felt as if something was happening behind them, something hidden from prying eyes. It was pure, childish curiosity, but it gradually, imperceptibly began to transform into a subtle, inexplicable unease. The house seemed dead, devoid of life, yet at the same time, it emanated a strange, invisible energy, a quiet hum of something unsettling. One evening, as I sat by the window, engrossed in reading a book, I noticed movement. One of the curtains in the house across the street, the one closest to us, had slightly parted. Just a couple of centimeters, no more, a tiny sliver of darkness revealed. And in that narrow slit, I saw an eye. A single eye, dark and unblinking, staring directly at me. It was dark, almost black, and utterly motionless, like a doll's eye, devoid of any warmth or light. It seemed to me that it wasn't blinking, not even once. I froze, the book slipping from my hands and thudding softly onto the carpet. My heart pounded in my chest like a trapped bird. I couldn't look away, my gaze locked onto that unblinking stare. It probably lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity, an endless moment of silent scrutiny. Then the curtain slowly, almost imperceptibly, closed, and the house once again plunged into its impenetrable mystery, leaving me alone with the lingering image of that eye. I told my parents about it, my voice trembling slightly. My mom, as always, tried to reassure me, saying I must have imagined it, that it was a trick of the light or my overactive imagination. Dad, trying to lighten the mood, joked that Mr. Henderson was probably just checking if our lights were on, a harmless old man. But I knew that wasn't it. I saw that eye. Its gaze was too real, too piercing, too devoid of human warmth to be a figment of my imagination. It felt like a direct, unsettling connection. After that, I started noticing the curtains in the house across the street occasionally parting. Always the same curtain, always the same narrow slit. And I always felt that someone was watching from behind it, even when I couldn't see the eye. I tried not to look in that direction, to ignore the unsettling feeling, but it was stronger than me. My gaze was constantly, against my will, drawn to that window as if by a magnet. I felt goosebumps crawl up my skin whenever I passed by it, a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the weather. The house became a silent, constant presence in my periphery, a source of quiet dread. One day, while I was playing in the yard with a ball, it accidentally rolled onto Mr. Henderson's lawn. I walked up to the fence, my stomach churning with a mix of apprehension and childish determination, to ask him to retrieve it. I knocked on the door, first timidly, then louder, but no one answered. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. I was about to leave when I heard a faint creak. The door slightly opened. I only saw a narrow slit, but from it wafted a smell, a strange, musty odor, like old dust, mold, and something else. Something cloying and sickly sweet that I couldn't quite identify, but which filled me with an immediate, visceral revulsion. And again, I felt that gaze. I didn't see the eye, but I knew it was there, behind that slit, watching me, assessing me. "The ball," I whispered, my voice barely audible, trembling despite myself. The door slowly, silently closed, swallowing the strange odor. I stood there, unsure what to do, paralyzed by fear and disgust, my heart hammering against my ribs. A few minutes later, the door opened again, just enough for my ball to roll onto the lawn. It was clean, but I still felt it was somehow tainted, as if it had absorbed some of the house's unsettling aura. I snatched it up and, without looking back, ran home, not stopping until I was safely inside my own front door. From then on, I tried to avoid Mr. Henderson's house at all costs. I walked around it, if possible, crossing the street to the other side, and tried not to look in its direction. But the feeling of being watched never left me. Sometimes, when I returned home from school, I felt as if I saw a shadow flitting behind the curtained window, a fleeting movement that was gone before I could properly register it. Or heard a faint creak, like a floorboard groaning, when I passed by. It became a part of my daily life, a constant, unsettling background noise that caused a subtle but persistent anxiety, a low hum of dread. One day, when I was already a teenager, my friends and I decided to throw a party. The music was loud, we laughed, we had fun, trying to forget about everyday worries and the mundane realities of suburban life. At some point, I went out onto the porch to get some fresh air and a break from the noise, seeking a moment of quiet. And then I saw him. Mr. Henderson was standing on his porch, directly across from us, bathed in the dim glow of his own porch light. He didn't move, like a statue carved from stone. He just stood there, staring at our house, at the bright lights, at the laughter, at the music, at us. His face was utterly motionless, like a mask, devoid of any emotion, any hint of life. He didn't look angry or upset, just observing. His gaze was empty yet piercing, as if he saw something more than just a noisy party, something deeper and more sinister. I felt a profound chill run down my spine, despite the warm summer night. I quickly went back inside, trying to hide my trembling, the sudden, inexplicable fear that had gripped me. I told my friends, but they just laughed, dismissing it. "Old weirdo," one of them said, shrugging. "He probably just doesn't like the noise." Another added, "He probably just went out for some air, and you're imagining things, you're always so dramatic." But I knew that wasn't it. He wasn't just an old weirdo, he was someone who watched. Always. And I still sometimes wake up at night feeling watched, a prickling sensation on my skin. I go to the window, and in the deep shadows of the night I feel as if I see a barely perceptible slit in the curtains of the house across the street. And I know that behind those perpetually curtained windows, someone is still watching. And I don't know what he's waiting for. But that waiting, that constant unseen presence, that silent, unblinking gaze, still haunts me to this day. Story 2. The Lost Phone. This happened last summer when I decided to visit my aunt in a small, almost forgotten town, tucked away somewhere deep in the countryside. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, where the air smelled cleaner and the nights were truly dark. I was only there for a few days, a brief escape from the city's relentless pace, and I wanted to explore the surroundings, to truly immerse myself in the nature that was so lacking in my urban life. One day, I decided to take a walk through the old forest that began right behind her house. My aunt, seeing me off with a thermos of iced tea, warned me not to go too deep because it was easy to get lost there and that the forest is old, with character, and it doesn't always give back what it takes. I just waved her off, confident in my navigation skills and armed with my smartphone's GPS. Of course, I didn't listen. I walked along a narrow, barely visible path, enjoying the profound silence and the crisp, fresh air, permeated with the rich scent of pine needles, damp earth, and decaying leaves. I took photos with my phone, capturing the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, the intricate patterns of moss on ancient trees. I listened to music through my headphones, completely immersed in my thoughts, lost in the beauty of the moment. At some point, I turned off the path to get a closer look at an unusual, gnarled tree, its branches twisted into grotesque shapes that caught my eye. I spent a few minutes there, trying to find a good angle for a shot circling it, and when I returned, I realized I had lost my bearings. The path had vanished, swallowed by the dense undergrowth. All the trees looked identical, towering and indifferent, and I couldn't figure out where I had come from, or which way to go. A cold, creeping panic slowly but surely began to engulf me. I pulled out my phone to check the map, my fingers fumbling, but found it wasn't there. My pocket was empty. I must have dropped it when I turned off the path or when I was pushing through the thick, thorny bushes. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I was in an unfamiliar forest, completely alone, without my phone, without a signal. And the sun was already slowly but inexorably sinking below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched like grasping fingers. I tried to retrace my steps, calling out my own name, hoping to spot the phone, but it was useless. I walked in circles, my desperation growing with each passing minute. And with each passing minute it grew darker. The shadows deepened, merging into an oppressive blackness, and the forest seemed denser, more hostile, its ancient trees looming like silent sentinels. I started shouting, my voice hoarse, hoping someone, anyone, would hear me, but the only response was in deafening silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the snapping of twigs under my feet. My voice seemed so weak and insignificant in that vast, silent, indifferent space. When it became completely dark, a darkness I had never experienced in the city, I decided to find a place to spend the night. I stumbled upon a small clearing, barely larger than a room, surrounded by tall, imposing fir trees, and settled down under one of them, trying to keep warm by hugging myself, shivering despite the mild summer air. I was terrified, every rustle and creak amplified in the silence, but I tried to stay calm, clinging to the hope that in the morning I would surely find my way out. And then I heard it. A ringtone. My phone. It was playing my favorite melody, a cheerful, upbeat tune, the very one I had set as my ringtone for my aunt. The sound came from somewhere deep in the forest, very close, yet at the same time it seemed strangely distant, muffled, as if coming from another dimension. My heart pounded with a mix of relief and a sudden inexplicable dread. I was so glad I had found it. I jumped up and, without thinking, walked towards the sound, making my way through the oppressive darkness, branches whipping at my face. The melody grew louder, clearer, and I walked straight towards it, as if enchanted, drawn by an irresistible force. I pushed through thick bushes, stumbling over roots and branches, ignoring the sharp scratches that appeared on my arms and legs. And then I saw it. My phone lay on the ground, under an old, gnarled, fallen tree that looked like it had been there for decades. It glowed in the darkness, a beacon of artificial light in the natural gloom, and the melody played at full volume, filling the night forest. I reached out to pick it up, my hand trembling, but at the last moment something stopped me. A cold wave of intuition washed over me. I noticed that the phone was lying too neatly, too precisely. Not as if it had fallen, but as if it had been placed there with deliberate care. And there were no tracks around it, no footprints, even though the ground was damp and soft from recent rain. It was unsettlingly pristine. I crouched down, my eyes fixed on the glowing screen, and examined it carefully. The melody continued to play, a cheerful, mocking loop. And then I noticed that the phone screen wasn't just glowing. Something was written on it. A message. It appeared directly on the screen, over the call, as if someone had sent it to me, or typed it directly onto my locked screen. "I know you're here." My heart skipped a beat. I recoiled, stumbling backward and falling to the ground, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't believe my eyes. Who could have written that? And how did they know I was here in this remote, forgotten place where I had barely managed to get myself? It was impossible. There was no signal. No one knew I was here. I grabbed the phone. The melody stopped. The message disappeared. The screen went black. I tried to turn it on, pressing all the buttons, but it didn't respond. The battery was completely dead, drained to nothing. I stood there in complete, suffocating darkness, with a dead phone in my hand, the silence of the forest pressing in on me. I felt an undeniable, chilling certainty someone was watching me. I heard a faint rustle in the bushes behind me, a barely perceptible creak of a branch, as if someone was slowly, deliberately moving around me, circling. I didn't wait. I didn't dare to look back. I started running, without knowing where I was going, just wanting to get away from that place, from that presence. I ran as fast as I could, blindly crashing through the undergrowth until I was utterly exhausted, until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. I ran all night, driven by pure terror, until I saw faint lights in the distance, a shimmering promise of civilization. It was a road. I stumbled onto it and walked along the shoulder until I reached the nearest gas station, a beacon of fluorescent light and human activity, where my aunt finally found me, her face etched with worry. I told her everything, my voice hoarse and broken. She, of course, didn't believe me. She said I must have just been scared and imagined things, that the stress of being lost had played tricks on my mind. She even showed me that my phone was completely dead when I found it, and that there were no messages on it, no trace of what I had seen. But I knew that wasn't it. I saw that message. I heard that ringtone, calling me deeper into the woods. I still don't know what it was. Who left me that message? And how did they know I was there? I never went back to that forest. And I still sometimes wake up at night feeling that someone is watching me. A cold, unseen gaze, as if that presence from the forest is still haunting me, still knows where I am. And I know it's not just my imagination. It was too real, too precise, too terrifying to be just a dream or a hallucination. Story 3, The Old Recording. My grandfather was a collector, not just a hobbyist, but a true fanatic who dedicated his life to finding and accumulating all sorts of curiosities. He collected everything: old coins, rare stamps, yellowed books with faded covers, and especially vinyl records. His house was overflowing with them, stacks of records piled on shelves under the bed, in closets, even in the bathroom. He used to say that every record was a story, sealed in time, a voice waiting to be heard. After his death, as my parents and I were sorting through his belongings, trying to bring some order to the chaos, I stumbled upon a box that stood apart from all the others. It was hidden deep in a storage closet, beneath a pile of old blankets. The box was wrapped in several layers of yellowed tape, and on it, in my grandfather's messy handwriting, was written, "Do not open. Ever." Of course, this only piqued my curiosity. I was old enough not to believe in childish scares, and the inscription seemed more like an amusing eccentricity of an old eccentric, a final, playful mystery. I took the box home, and when I was alone, I carefully, trying not to damage the old cardboard, opened it. Inside, wrapped in a piece of old yellowed cloth, lay a single vinyl record. It had no cover, just a plain black disc, and there were no labels, no identifying marks on it. It looked very old, scratched, as if it had been played many times or stored carelessly. I was intrigued, a strange sense of anticipation building within me. I had an old record player at home that I'd bought at a flea market a few years ago, more for decoration than for use. I decided to listen to what was on it. I carefully wiped the record, placed it on the turntable, and lowered the needle. At first, there was only noise, a loud hiss, crackle, and static, as if the recording was very old or damaged. I was about to turn it off, thinking it was just a blank or ruined record, when through the cacophony I heard a voice. Faint, barely discernible, but distinct. It was a man's voice, whispering something, almost a desperate plea. I leaned closer to the speakers, straining to hear, and slowly, cautiously, I turned up the volume, trying to make out the words. The whisper grew louder, clearer, and I began to distinguish the words, piecing them together like fragments of a broken dream. It was a story, a chilling, unsettling story about a house, about an old house that stood on the outskirts of town, abandoned and forgotten, its windows like vacant eyes. The voice, now clearer though still trembling, spoke of strange things that happened in that house, of shadows that moved on their own when no one was around, shifting and elongating in the periphery of vision, of faint, disembodied sounds that came from empty rooms, whispers that seemed to call out a name, of the constant, unnerving feeling of being watched, even when you were utterly alone. My heart pounded. The story was chilling, but something in the voice, in its raw, desperate intonations, compelled me to listen. It sounded as if the person speaking was very frightened. His voice trembled, broke, as if he was about to cry or scream. As the story progressed, the voice became more agitated, more panicked, its words tumbling out in a torrent of fear. He began to describe how the shadows became more real, taking on outlines, how the sounds turned from whispers into faint moans, and then into distinct screams. He spoke of not being alone in that house, that someone or something was pursuing him, playing with him, slowly driving him insane. He described the cold that penetrated his bones and the feeling of someone's breath on the back of his neck, even when no one was physically there. And then I heard it. On the recording, cutting through the man's increasingly frantic monologue, another sound appeared. Faint, barely discernible, but very ominous. It was a low, guttural sound, almost like a choked laugh, that seemed to come from the very depths of the recording, a sound of pure, cold amusement. The voice on the recording cried out. It was a raw, desperate sound, full of an unbearable despair, the sound of a person who had encountered something truly unspeakable, something beyond human comprehension. Then, abruptly, there was a loud, sickening thud, the sound of something heavy falling to the floor, a sickening crunch, and then complete, absolute silence. Only the persistent hiss and crackle of the record, which now seemed deafening in the sudden void, filled the room. I sat there, frozen, paralyzed by a terror I had never known. My hands trembled uncontrollably. Cold sweat ran down my forehead, chilling me to the bone. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I couldn't comprehend what I had just heard. Was this a recording of a real event, a man's final moments? Or was it some kind of macabre performance, an elaborate, twisted prank my grandfather had left for me? But if it was a prank, it was too realistic, too profoundly disturbing to be anything but genuine. I carefully, with a trembling hand, lifted the needle from the record. The disc continued to spin, slowly, monotonously, a silent testament to the horror it contained. I looked at it, this plain black circle. It was ordinary, yet I felt as if it radiated an intense cold, as if some invisible, ominous energy emanated from its grooves, a residue of the terror it had captured. I tried to find information about this record, searching online, but found nothing. No labels, no identifying marks, no artist name, no song titles, no mention in any obscure forum or archive. It was as if it didn't exist. I asked my parents if they knew anything about it, but they said they had never seen it, and that my grandfather had never mentioned such a peculiar item. I put the record back in the box and taped it shut, much more thoroughly this time, adding extra layers of duct tape, as if to contain the horror within. I didn't want to listen to it anymore. I couldn't. But what I had heard wouldn't leave me alone. I constantly replayed the story in my mind, that man's desperate voice, his final cry, that chilling, inhuman sound. They were stuck in my memory like a deeply embedded splinter, a constant, painful reminder. A few days later, I started noticing strange things in my own apartment. I heard faint rustles in the corners of rooms when I was alone, even though no one else was there. I felt as if the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift and deepen when I looked away, only to return to their original positions when I looked back. Sometimes I heard a faint, barely discernible chuckle, a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep within the apartment, from its darkest, most hidden corners. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that I was thinking too much about that recording, that my brain was simply filling in the details, creating phantom sounds and movements. But the feeling that I wasn't alone grew stronger, more persistent, more unsettling. I started sleeping with the lights on, a childish comfort that did little to quell the rising dread. One night, I woke up abruptly, my heart pounding from a deep sleep. I felt an undeniable presence, a cold weight in the room. I opened my eyes and saw a shadow. It was tall, shapeless, black as pitch, a swirling void that seemed to absorb all light, and it stood directly over my bed, blocking out the faint glow from my nightlight. I couldn't make out its features, but I felt its immense, unsettling presence, a coldness that seemed to emanate from it. And then I heard that sound, the same low, guttural, inhuman sound I had heard on the recording. Now it seemed to come from right next to my ear, a chilling, intimate sound that filled my entire being. I screamed, a raw, desperate sound that tore from my throat. The shadow vanished instantly, dissolving into the air, leaving behind only an icy chill. My parents, who lived in the next apartment, rushed into my room, awakened by my scream, but of course found nothing. They said I had a nightmare, that I was just overtired, stressed. I still don't know what it was. Was that record cursed? A vessel for something unsettling? Or did it simply open something that had always been here, in this world, lurking just beyond our perception, but which I hadn't noticed before? I don't know, but I know one thing: I will never listen to that record again. And I know that sound will always haunt me, a constant chilling echo, reminding me of what I heard, and of what, perhaps, is now following me forever.